East of Eden, Chapter 16. Samuel Hamilton rode back home in a night so flooded with moonlight that the hills took on the quality of the white and dusty moon. The trees and earth were moon-dry, silent and airless and dead. The shadows were black without shading, and the open places white without colour. Here and there Samuel could see secret movement, for the moon feeders were at work, the deer which browse all night when the moon is clear and sleep under thickets in the day. Rabbits and field mice and all other small hunted that feels safer in the concealing light crept and hopped and crawled and froze to resemble stones or small bushes when ear or nose suspected danger. The predators were working too, the long weasels like waves of brown light, the cobby wildcats crouching near the ground, almost invisible except when their yellow eyes caught light and flashed for a second, the foxes sniffling with pointed upraised noses for a warm-blooded supper, the raccoons paddling near still water, talking frogs. The coyotes nuzzled along the slopes and, torn with sorrow-joy, raised their heads and shouted their feeling, half keen, half laughter, at their goddess moon. And over all the shadowy screech owls sailed, drawing a smudge of shadowy fear below them on the ground. The wind of the afternoon was gone, and only a little breeze like a sigh was stirred by the restless thermals of the warm, dry hills. Doxology's loud, offbeat hoofsteps silenced the night people until after he had passed. Samuel's beard glinted white, and his greying hair stood up high on his head. He had hung his black hat on his saddle-horn. An ache was on the top of his stomach, an apprehension that was like a sick thought. It was the Weltschmerz, which we used to call Welsh rat, and the world sadness that rises into the soul like a gas and spreads despair so that you probe for the offending event and can find none. Samuel went back in his mind over the fine ranch and the indications of water. No Welsh rats could come out of that unless he sheltered a submerged envy. He looked in himself for envy and could find none. He went on to Adam's dream of a garden like Eden and to Adam's adoration of Cathy. Nothing there, unless his secret mind brooded over his own healed loss. But that was so long ago he had forgotten the pain. The memory was mellow and warm and comfortable now that it was all over. His loins and his thighs had forgotten hunger. As he rode through the light and dark of tree shade and open, his mind moved on. And when had the Welsh rat started crawling in his chest? He found it then, and it was Cathy. Pretty, tiny, delicate Cathy. But what about her? She was silent, but many women were silent. What was it? Where had it come from? He remembered that he had felt an imminence akin to the one that came to him when he held the water wand. And he remembered the shivers when the goose walked over his grave. Now he had pinned it down in time and place and person. It had come at dinner, and it had come from Cathy. He built her face in front of him and studied her wide-set eyes, delicate nostrils, mouth smaller than he liked but sweet, small firm chin, and back to her eyes. Were they cold? Was it her eyes? He was circling to the point. The eyes of Cathy had no message, no communication of any kind. There was nothing recognizable behind them. They were not human eyes. They reminded him of something. What was it? Some memory, some picture? He strove to find it, and then it came, of itself. It rose out of the years, complete with all its colours and its cries, its crowded feelings. He saw himself, a very little boy, so small that he had to reach high for his father's hand. He felt the cobbles of Londonderry under his feet and the crush and gaiety of the one big city he had seen. A fair it was, with puppet shows and stalls of produce and horses and sheep penned right in the street for sale or trade or auction, and other stalls of bright-coloured knick-knackery, desirable and, because his father was gay, almost possessable. And then the people turned like a strong river, and they were carried along a narrow street as though they were chips on a flood tide. pressure at chest and back and the feet keeping up. The narrow street opened out to a square, and against the grey wall of a building there was a high structure of timbers and a noosed rope hanging down. Samuel and his father were pushed and bunted by the water of people, pushed closer and closer. He could hear in his memory ear his father saying, "It's no thing for a child. It's no thing for anybody, but less for a child." His father struggled to turn, to force his way back against the flood wave of people. "Let us out, please let us out, I have a child here." The wave was faceless, and it pushed without passion. Samuel raised his head to look at the structure. A group of dark-clothed, dark-hatted men had climbed up on the high platform, and in their midst was a man with golden hair, dressed in dark trousers and a light blue shirt open at the throat. Samuel and his father were so close that the boy had to raise his head high to see. The golden man seemed to have no arms. He looked out over the crowd and then looked down, looked right at Samuel. The picture was clear, lighted and perfect. The man's eyes had no depth. They were not like other eyes, not like the eyes of a man. Suddenly there was a quick movement on the platform, and Samuel's father put both his hands on the boy's head so that his palms cupped over the ears and his fingers met behind. The hands forced Samuel's head down and forced his face tight in against his father's black best coat. Struggle as he would, he could not move his head. He could only see a band of light around the edges of his eyes, and only a muffled roar of sound came to his ears through his father's hands. He heard heartbeats in his ears. Then he felt his father's hands and arms grow rigid with set muscles, and against his face he could feel his father's deep caught breathing, and then deep intake and held breath, and his father's hands trembling. A little more there was to it, and he dug it up and set it before his eyes in the air above the horse's head. A worn and battered table at a pub, loud talk and laughter. A pewter mug was in front of his father, and a cup of hot milk, sweet and aromatic with sugar and cinnamon, before himself. His father's lips were curiously blue, and there were tears in his father's eyes. "I'd never have brought you if I'd known. It's not fit for any man to see, and sure not for a small boy." "I didn't see any," Samuel piped. "You held my head down." "I'm glad of that." "What was it?" "I'll have to tell you. They were killing a bad man." "Was it the golden man?" "Yes, it was. And you must put no sorrow on him. He had to be killed. Not once, but many times he did dreadful things only a fiend could think of. It's not his hanging sorrows me, but that they make a holiday of it, that should be done secretly, in the dark." "I saw the golden man. He looked right down at me." "For that even more I thank God he's gone." "What did he do?" "I'll never tell you nightmare things." "He had the strangest eyes, the golden man. He put me in mind of a goat's eyes." "Oh, drink your sweetie milk, and you have a stick with ribbons and a long whistle like silver." "And the shiny box with a picture on it?" "That also, so you drink up your sweetie milk and beg no more." There it was, mind out of the dusty past. Doxology was climbing the last rise before the hollow of the home ranch, and the big feet stumbled over stones in the roadway. It was the eyes, of course, Samuel thought. Only twice in my life have I seen eyes like that. Not like human eyes. And he thought, it's the night and the moon. Now, what connection under heaven can there be between the golden man hanged so long ago and the sweet little bearing mother? Lisa's right. My imagination will get me a passport to hell one day. Let me dig this nonsense out, else I'll be searching that poor child for evil. This is how we can get trapped. Now, think hard and then lose it. Some accident of eye shape and eye colour it is? But no, that's not it. It's a look and has no reference to shape or colour. Well, why is a look evil then? Maybe such a look may have been sometime on a holy face. Stop this romancing and never let it trouble again, ever. He shivered. I'll have to set up a goose fence around my grave, he thought. And Samuel Hamilton resolved to help greatly with the Salinas Valley Eden, to make a secret guilt payment for his ugly thoughts. Lisa Hamilton, her apple cheeks flaming red, moved like a caged leopard in front of the stove when Samuel came into the kitchen in the morning. The oak wood fire roared up past an open damper to heat the oven for the bread, which lay white and rising in the pans. Lisa had been up before dawn. She always was. It was just as sinful to her to lie abed after light as it was to be abroad after dark. There was no possible virtue in either. Only one person in the world could, with impunity and without crime, lie between her crisp iron sheets after dawn, after sun-up, even to the far reaches of mid-morning, and that was her youngest and last-born, Joe. Only Tom and Joe lived on the ranch now, and Tom, big and red, already cultivating a fine flowing moustache, sat at the kitchen table with his sleeves rolled down, as he had been mannered. Lisa poured a thick batter from a pitcher onto a soapstone griddle. The hot cakes rose like little hassocks, and small volcanoes formed and erupted on them until they were ready to be turned. A cheerful brown they were, with tracings of darker brown, and the kitchen was full of the good sweet smell of them. Samuel came in from the yard, where he had been washing himself. His face and beard gleamed with water, and he turned down the sleeves of his blue shirt as he entered the kitchen. Rolled-up sleeves at the table were not acceptable to Mrs. Hamilton. They indicated either an ignorance or a flouting of the niceties. "Oh, I'm late, Mother," Samuel said. She did not look round at him. Her spatula moved like a striking snake, and the hot cakes settled their white sides hissing on the soapstone. "What time was it you came home?" she asked. "Oh, it was late. Must have been near 11. I didn't look, fearing to waken you." "I did not waken," Lisa said grimly, "and maybe you can find it healthy to rove all night, but the Lord God will do what he sees fit about that." It was well known that Lisa Hamilton and the Lord God held similar convictions on nearly every subject. She turned and reached, and a plate of crisp hot cakes lay between Tom's hands. "How does the Sanchez place look?" she asked. Samuel went to his wife, leaned down from his height, and kissed her round red cheek. "Good morning, Mother. Give me your blessing." "Bless you," said Lisa automatically. Samuel sat down at the table and said, "Bless you, Tom. Well, Mr. Trask is making great changes. He's fitting up the old house to live in." Lisa turned sharply from the stove. "The one where the cows and pigs have slept the years?" "Oh, he's ripped out the floors and window casings, all new and new painted." "You'll never get the smell of pigs out," Lisa said firmly. "There's a pungency left by a pig that nothing can wash out or cover up." "Well, I went inside and looked around, Mother, and I could smell nothing except paint." "When the paint dries, you'll smell the pig," she said. "He's got a garden laid out with spring water running through it, and he's set a place apart for flowers, roses and the like, and some of the bushes are coming clear from Boston." "I don't see how the Lord God puts up with such waste," she said grimly. "Not that I don't like a rose myself." "He said he'd try to root out some cuttings for me," Samuel said. Tom finished his hot cakes and stirred his coffee. "What kind of a man is he, Father?" "Well, I think he's a fine man, has a good tongue and a fair mind. He's given to dreaming—" "Hear how the pot blackguarding the kettle," Lisa interrupted. "I know, Mother, I know, but have you ever thought that my dreaming takes the place of something I haven't? Mr. Trask has practical dreams, and the sweet dollars to make them solid. He wants to make a garden of his land, and he will do it too." "What's his wife like?" Lisa asked. "Well, she's very young and very pretty. She's quiet, hardly speaks, but then she's having her first baby soon." "I know that," Lisa said. "What was her name before?" "I don't know." "Well, where did she come from?" "I don't know." She put his plate of hot cakes in front of him and poured coffee in his cup and refilled Tom's cup. "What did you learn then? How does she dress?" "Why, very nice, pretty. A blue dress and a little coat, pink but tight about the waist." "Ha, you've an eye for that. Would you say they were made clothes or store-bought?" "Oh, I think store-bought." "You wouldn't know," Lisa said firmly. "You thought the travelling suit Desi made to go to San Jose was store-bought." "Ah, Desi's the clever love," said Samuel. "A needle sings in her hands." Tom said, "Desi's thinking of opening a dressmaking shop in Salinas." "She told me," Samuel said, "she'd make a great success of it." "Salinas?" Lisa put up her hands on her hips. "Desi didn't tell me." I'm afraid we've done bad service to our dearie, Samuel said. Here she wanted to save it for a real tin plate surprise to her mother, and we've leaked it like wheat from a mousehole sack. She might have told me, said Lisa. I don't like surprises. Well, go on. What was she doing? Who? Why, Mrs. Trask, of course. Doing? Why, sitting in a chair under an oak tree. Her time's not far. Her hands, Samuel, her hands. What was she doing with her hands? Samuel searched his memory. Oh, nothing, I guess. I remember she had little hands, and she held them clasped in her lap. Lisa sniffed. Not sewing, not mending, not knitting? No, Mother. I don't know that it's a good idea for you to go over there. Riches and idleness, devil's tools, and you've not a very sturdy resistance. Samuel raised his head and laughed with pleasure. Sometimes his wife delighted him, but he could never tell her how. It's only the riches I'll be going there for, Lisa. I meant to tell you after breakfast so you could sit down to hear. He wants me to bore 4 or 5 wells for him, and maybe put windmills and storage tanks. Is it all talk? Is it a windmill turned by water? Will he pay you, or will you come back excusing as usual? He'll pay when his crop comes in, she mimicked. He'll pay when his rich uncle dies. It's my experience, Samuel, and should be yours, that if they don't pay presently, they never pay at all. We could buy a valley farm with your promises. Adam Trask will pay, said Samuel. He's well fixed. His father left him a fortune. It's a whole winter of work, Mother. We'll lay something by and we'll have a Christmas to scrape the stars. He'll pay 50 cents a foot, and the windmills, Mother. I can make everything but the casings right here. I'll need the boys to help. I want to take Tom and Joe. Joe can't go, she said. You know he's delicate. I thought I might scrape off some of his delicacy. He can starve on delicacy. Joe can't go, she said finally. And who is to run the ranch while you and Tom are gone? I thought you'd ask George to come back. He doesn't like a clerk's job, even if it is in King City. Like it he may not, but he can take a measure of discomfort for $8 a week. Mother, Samuel cried, here's our chance to scratch our name in the First National Bank. Don't throw the weight of your tongue in the path of fortune, please, Mother. She grumbled to herself all morning over her work, while Tom and Samuel went over the boring equipment, sharpened bits, drew sketches of windmills, new in design, and measured for timbers and redwood water tanks. In the mid-morning, Joe came out to join them, and he became so fascinated that he asked Samuel to let him go. Samuel said, Offhand, I'd say I'm against it, Joe. Your mother needs you here. But I want to go, Father. And don't forget, next year I'll be going to college in Palo Alto, and that's going away, isn't it? Please let me go. I'll work hard. I'm sure you would if you could come, but I'm against it. And when you talk to your mother about it, I'll thank you to let it slip that I'm against it. You might even throw in that I refused you. Joe grinned, and Tom laughed aloud. Will you let her persuade you? Tom asked. Samuel scowled at his sons. I'm a hard-opinioned man, he said. Once I've set my mind, oxen can't stir me. I've looked at it from all angles, and my word is, Joe can't go. You wouldn't want to make a liar out of my word, would you? I'll go in and talk to her now, said Joe. Now, son, take it easy, Samuel called after him. Use your head. Let her do most of it. Meanwhile, I'll set my stubborn up. 2 days later, the big wagon pulled away, loaded with timbers and tackle. Tom drove 4 horses, and beside him Samuel and Joe sat swinging their feet.